Okay, so now it's time to wrap up our lecture about food and hunger and some of the challenges we face as a society. Um, the reality is GMOs are here to stay. They are not going away. We're not going to get rid of genetically modified organisms. We need them because of the ability to produce more food on less land under not ideal conditions and so on and so forth that GMOs enable us to do. The concern, though, are issues associated with GMOs. So that's what we want to talk about here. What are some of these different issues or concerns associated with GMOs? One of the first concerns. All right, superweeds and resistance. So when we GMO different crops, we're trying to make them resistant to where we don't need herbicides and pesticides and things like that. Well, those genetics get out into nature, and we have Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready wheat, Roundup Ready soybeans, and etc. They resist herbicides, chemicals that kill plants. Well, those genes are getting out of the crops and into the native species. So now weeds are becoming resistant. So I used to be able to spray my field with Roundup. I could get rid of all the weeds. Well, now it doesn't work. So then you need a new chemical to kill the super weeds, and they'll just develop resistance as well. So it's not just to herbicides, but to pesticides, to all these things. And you go, okay, it's like we're running on a treadmill and we got to run faster to stay in the same place. So it's a big challenge. What does it do to the native biodiversity? Sometimes we're seeing that stuff decrease and crash and reduction in native biodiversity because of GMOs. Not just in the plant world, in the animal world as well. They outcompete the natives and push the natives into extinction. Genetically modified salmon grow bigger, faster, and stronger than natural salmon. And when those guys get out, they outcompete the native salmon and push native salmon populations down. So it can become a huge issue that you may lose the native biodiversity that you need to be able to maintain a healthy balance. So you lose a native biodiversity, you might be losing important genes that you need in the future. So huge concerns there. We may be actually creating what they call novel toxins, new poisons that we don't know what they're going to do. What they're going to do to the environment, what they're going to do to the consumer if we're eating it. So, there's some big problems tied to that. Are we creating things that are not going to be healthy in the big picture and long term? Sometimes these things are only available to the rich and the wealthy. Less developed countries, they can't afford this stuff. They can't afford to develop it themselves because of the biotechnology required and the knowledge and just the billions of dollars to do the research. Those farmers can't afford the seed. So it changes the market. Certain countries can produce it and other countries can't, and now you start getting into competition for your products and things like that. And even in our own country, new variety comes out. The big farms, the big corporate farms have the resources to buy the newest, the latest, the most technologically advanced. Your small independent farmer, he can't afford that stuff. So it creates a disadvantage for some farmers because of the cost associated with it. And labeling. I want you guys to think about this. Should we label GM foods? In that picture right there is a label that shows partially produced with genetic engineering. part of the food associated with this product, candy, is made from genetically engineered plants. Do we want to know this as a consumer? That's something we as consumers need to decide and make our voice heard. It's estimated about 60% of processed, let me make this a little smaller, of processed foods, about 60% of processed foods in the US contain genetically modified ingredients. Oop, that should be ingredients. I don't know what that is. All right. So take a look at something in your kitchen. I want you guys to look at a processed food. Here's a bag of granola. Here's a box of cereal. Here's a whatever. How many things can you come up with that have genetically modified ingredients? And does it say it? Do you know if it has genetically modified ingredients? That's the big thing, because a lot of it we don't know. So, all right, so concerns out there, we definitely have to factor all this stuff in when we're talking about food production for the human population. The challenge is we are so far down this path, we can't stop. We can't cut back and say, nope, let's not do any GM stuff because we don't want to do it. The population depends upon this. And if we don't do it, we're going to see those famines happen more often. So how do we do it as wisely as possible? Okay, now the last thing to mention, just briefly, let's touch into the policies, the politics, etc. about food production. Massive government subsidies pay for research and to enable increases in production. A lot of tax funding goes towards food production. So the challenge there is it goes towards large-scale food production, which means cheap food, which leads to obesity issues. So the government will fund and support farming industry when you're producing corn and beans and wheat and things like that, but they don't necessarily fund that apple orchard in Chatham or the orchard, Jeffrey's Orchard, north of the airport in Springfield. They don't get government subsidies, but the guys out there, the people, the farmers out there raising corn and beans get subsidies. So we've created the problem of obesity through a lot of our food production policies. So if we want to change obesity, this is an area we should also consider making adjustments. And I'm not saying take money away from corn and bean farmers, but can we give subsidies to people who raise non-traditional agricultural products? Orchards, vegetable farmers, honeybees, these types of things. Can we get subsidies to offset their cost of production so then they can increase production, move more of that into the food supply chain, and give people healthy things? Imagine if you could buy an apple for the same price as that macaroni and cheese. Hopefully most people would choose the apple. But because of financial restrictions, we often choose the cheaper stuff, which is subsidized by the government, and again, contributing to the obesity epidemic. So it's this cycle, the circle we're in, that is just messed up. The other thing to mention is last year and this year, we don't know what's going on with this China trade war. This is just a train wreck for the agricultural world, the agricultural community. A lot of them don't know what's going to happen with their grain this year. Last year, if you guys notice those big, long, white, I don't want to call them socks because they were 10 feet high and 500 feet long. Those big, long, white tarp tubes in the fields, those were full of grain because we didn't have an export market because of the trade war with China. we as a country sat on billions of tons of grain that we don't know what to do with. We don't know where it's going to go. Last year, because of the trade war, farmers got they called it a subsidy. And if you were a farmer, I'm just making up easy numbers here. We can go to the Board of Trade or the agricultural departments in town and get the exact numbers. But if you raised beans, let's say you raised beans last year and you produced 10,000 bushels of beans, you could go in, file for your subsidy, and you would get paid so many cents per bushel of bean in that farm subsidy. I think it was 3 cents a bushel or something like that. So 10,000 bushels, 3 cents a bushel. Okay, I got a nice chunk of money because of the trade war, because the market prices of beans went down so much. The market price of corn went down so much because of the trade war. So we don't know what's going on with export markets right now. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of concern among the agricultural community that these trade wars are going to destroy the agricultural industry in the United States, because the markets that we traditionally had for all of our, or for a large percentage of our exports, they've gone to other suppliers. They can't wait till the trade war is sorted out to then say, okay, now we'll buy your grain. We've gone 2 years without corn and beans. They have found other suppliers. And one of our big competitors in this South America, countries in South America, and particularly Brazil, big competitor when it comes to beans and corn. They can grow 2 crops a year because of that ecosystem, because of that biome, year-round growing season. So a corn farmer in Brazil can double crop. We can't compete against that when it comes to agricultural yields. Even if we're producing more per acre, we only get 1 harvest a year. Brazil can produce 60% of what we do per acre. They do a double crop. They're now at 120%. We're at 100. They outcompete us. They can drop their prices lower and basically outcompete us and take the markets from us. Big concerns. So anybody who's in agriculture, hopefully this trade war stuff gets sorted out for the positive and sorted out quickly. All right, so food is essential for life, obviously, but we want to make sure when we're eating, we're trying to be as healthy as possible, and we think about some of these bigger pictures. All right, so now we get through the food chapter. The next one, we get into chapter 10. I'm going to talk about farming, conventional farming, and then talk about sustainable practices and different ways to do agriculture for a long-term scenario. So, all right, so that'll be the next online lecture for you guys.